Hello, and welcome back to another update where I cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war. In this one, we see that the Russians have made several advances both in the Kursk region and in the Eastern Front. The Ukrainians have made a single advance in the Kursk region. The Russians have launched a massive missile strike this night and followed it up with a second wave. There are reports that there may be a third wave as well. But this massive missile strike is likely the largest to date. According to the reports, there has been 10 arrivals in the Lviv direction within the city and in the general region. There has been 6 strikes on Ivano-Frankivsk. There's been 3 in the Lutsk direction, 2 in Rivne, 3 in Ternopil, 5 in Khmelnytsky, 3 in Zhytomyr, 7 in Vinnytsia. In the Kiev direction, there has been 2 strikes in the Shuliani airport in southwestern parts of Kiev. There was a first wave strike on Kiev. There was about 9 strikes in Kiev itself, 1 in the central suburbs and 1 in the eastern suburbs of Brovary. So there was a massive strike on Kiev, as well as the massive strike with 10 separate strikes in Lviv. In the Odessa direction, there's been 2 strikes. In Kropivnitsky, there's been a single strike. In Kryvyi Rih, there's been 2 strikes. In Kremenchuk, there's been 2 strikes. In Zaporizhia and Dnipro, there's been 2 strikes in each of those. In the Poltava direction, there's been 3 strikes, and there was a first wave strike as well. In Mirorod, there's been a single strike. In Chernihiv direction, there's been a single strike. In the Sumy direction, there was a strike in the first wave. In the Kharkiv direction, there was both a strike in the first wave and 4 strikes in the second wave. So we see there was a first wave strike in Kharkiv, Poltava, Sumy, and Kiev, and the second wave strike was a massive one all throughout the country. The first wave was purely missiles. The second wave was a combination of about 80 German-2 drones and several missiles. There was reported to be launched about 11 Tu-95MS bombers, and then there's been 2 MiG-31K that have reached their launch positions, in combination with caliber missiles being sent from this Black Sea of the Russian Navy of about 24 missiles. So there was several missiles from that. On top of that, there was a report of 6 additional Tu-22M3 bombers being launched. So we see that there was approximately 17 bombers flying and several caliber missiles from the Black Sea on top of the 80 German drones. So we saw this is a massive strike and possibly the largest to date. And again, there are reports that suggest that there may be a third one. The consequences of these strikes are still unknown as it just happened, but it is reported that there is an issue with the water infrastructure and electricity throughout the entirety of Ukraine. The electric trains have been replaced with diesel trains to keep them running, as the electricity for the trains are completely gone, so the electric trains cannot function, and this would have an impact on the supply capabilities of the Ukrainians. But this is largely a strike on Ukraine's infrastructure of electricity and water. The strikes on the airfield in Kiev and Ivano-Frankivsk, Khmelnytsky, and several areas in western Ukraine could also be targeted towards weapon deployments, F-16 fighter jets or other fighter jets in Ukraine. The same with Mirorod here in the Poltava direction, as well as Poltava itself. These are likely military targets. Same with Kiev. There were several that were purely electric and water infrastructure, and there are others that are weapon deployments or fighter jets. For the front line changes, we start out in the direction of Novohrodivka. The Russians have managed to advance in the southern flank of it, but have managed to capture the outskirts of the town and advance slightly within the town itself. And this was confirmed with the geolocated footage, which shows a very ballsy Russian soldier running through the field to move up towards the town itself. What caused him to be running across a field like that, I'm not really sure. But based on the footage, we can see that the Russians have occupied the buildings here in the southern parts of the town and this was a natural course of events considering the Russian advances further south along the road here between Konstantinivka and Vodiane. With Russian control further south, it clears up the area for further Russian advances from a southern direction, and this led to further control over Konstantinivka. So we see that the Russians are slowly advancing through the town itself as they move along the entirety of the road. Further north in the Pokrovsk direction, the only report was here in the Novohrodivka direction, where Deep State Map reports a further Russian advance in the central parts of the town. This leads to the Russians capturing the majority of the town, leaving about half of the southern parts under Ukrainian control or the gray zone, and the other half under Russian control. The northern parts of the town remain completely under Ukrainian control. In the Toretsk section of the front line, the Russians have made an advance south of the apartment complex area in the eastern parts. As I've previously mentioned, the Russians are here looking to gain full control over the areas east of the city itself, the forest areas, dacha area, government office area, and the Terracon Hill here in the central parts. And with this, they start operations here from the apartment complex area in the southern direction. And also, it's again confirmed with this geolocated footage, confirming Russian presence and moving down south from the apartment complex area. At the same time, it's like the Russians will move towards that area from the south to pincer the Ukrainian positions in the area and gain full control of it before storming the hill itself, and then moving on to the government offices and the eastern parts of Toretsk city. Further north, the Russians have advanced across the canal and are fighting over the fortified positions just across it. This is again confirmed with geolocated footage. The Russians are here attempting to expand their foothold across the canal, following the full capture of the eastern bank of it here to the south of Novohrodivka in the Bakhmut southern flank and Toretsk eastern flank. Expanding the Russian foothold across the canal here to the northeast of Toretsk would allow the Russians to launch operations in the direction of Delivka, Bilahora, as well as Dashne, Delivka, and so on, in the northern flank of Toretsk to flank the city completely. The Ukrainian presence here in the northern flank of Toretsk is not very concentrated. It is far between. We see several villages, fortified positions, and so on, but all spread apart. This makes it a less concentrated and less fortified position than the city itself, and the Konstantinivka and Chasiv directions, where there are several lines of defense and more compact defensive positions. This is why the Ukrainians are holding on to their foothold on the eastern bank of the canal, southern flank of Bakhmut, where the objective is to prevent the Russians from establishing proper positions on the western bank to launch operations in the direction of Konstantinivka itself. Gaining a proper foothold across the canal would allow the Russians to launch flanking maneuvers on Chasiv Yar and Toretsk at the same time. This is why it is such a significant position to be fighting over, and this is why the Russians have started operations here in between Klishivka and Ivanivske to push the Ukrainians back towards the canal, and at the same time launching operations to cross over the canal and establish a foothold. The fighting also continues over Drushba in the northeastern parts of Toretsk. Moving on to the Chasiv Yar direction, the Russians have expanded their foothold across the canal and are moving to counterattack the Ukrainian counterattack over the Russian crossing over the canal line here east of Chasiv Yar. So the sequence of events is that the Russians made a crossing in two areas, both by the microdistrict and through the forested area along the railways. The main push was through the railways. The Ukrainians counterattacked this by recapturing one of the crossings by the microdistrict and launching operations on the flank of the Russians by the railways. The Russians then expanded their positions along the railways, strengthened their positions in crossing, and then launched a counter operation to regain control over the crossing by the microdistrict. And now fighting is taking place exactly by that crossing. The Russians are here trying to expand their foothold, gain full control over the Chasiv Yar area that is along the canal line, along the microdistrict, gain full control of that to then start a push towards the central parts of Chasiv Yar. The Russians are also looking to move into the forest area here to the southern flank of Chasiv Yar, where the objective is to infiltrate the main parts of the city and create a crossing here by Ivanivske as well. This will allow the Russians to expand their offensive operations within Chasiv Yar. So the fights over Chasiv Yar is ongoing. In the Kursk section of the front line, we see that the Russians have here managed to push the Ukrainians out of Russia Konopelya in the eastern parts And the Ukrainians have then moved on to the northwestern parts on the other side of the river line. We see that the Ukrainians first pushed into the town itself, after which heavy fighting took place. The Russians managed to push them back across the river line, to which the Ukrainians responded by flanking the northern parts instead and attempting a different crossing. The heavy fighting is still taking place within the town itself, but the Russians are strongly opposing the Ukrainian advance and trying to hold on to the town. That is the current trend we're seeing in the Kursk direction. The Ukrainians continue their same tactic and same operations where they keep diving deep into Russian territory, trying to catch the Russian off guard, set up ambush positions, and gain an advantage through these deep pushes. However, the Russians have now established a front line which significantly strengthens their positions and allows them to prevent such breakthroughs for the Ukrainians. We see, for example, here in the direction of Novohrodivka, previously, the Ukrainians were spotted here in the northern direction along the railways. It is unclear whether they still have a presence there, as I've turned it into a gray zone. That is due to a relocated footage of Russian soldiers within Novohrodivka being attacked by Ukrainian FPV drones. The Ukrainian source claimed that it was a recon group of the Russians, so just a few soldiers, infiltrating the Ukrainian rear to try and set up ambushes or gain information, and in turn this would mean that the Russians do not really capture and control the Novohrodivka direction and the general area. However, there has been no recent footage of Ukrainian presence neither in the eastern direction or in the northern flank of Korenevo. This would indicate that the Russians have regained control over the areas where the Ukrainian DRG units had infiltrated, and the Ukrainians are now turning their attention towards the same river line and the southern flank of it, where they are looking to gain full control over that area before moving onwards towards Korenevo again, where they would have a stronger flank and are able to concentrate their forces in that one direction. However, so far we have seen that the Ukrainians have been unable to gain control over Korenevo due to the Russian resistance and defensive positions in the area. Therefore, we can tell that the Ukrainians are struggling to expand further and gain another breakthrough here in the Kursk direction. Despite the second wave beginning, there's been no significant breakthrough of the Ukrainians. Instead, the Russians have slowly been pushing the Ukrainians back in every single direction. Therefore, we see that the Ukrainians are now switching the strategies to an area where they are looking to cut off the supply completely and then take advantage of the situation to advance further to the south of the same river. However, so far there's been no launch of that operation, as the Russians have been able to establish pontoon bridges continuously. The question here is, who runs out first, Russians out of pontoon bridges or Ukrainians out of HIMARS, as the Russians have been able to find, detect and shoot down multiple HIMARS systems as they have been shooting the Russian bridges across. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and check out our Patreon for additional content. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.